Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Well, the Roe v. Wade decision came down from the Supreme Court just about 10 days ago. And a individual that I'm connected to on LinkedIn, Dr. Chitra Anand, who is a professor at Centennial College. She's managing director of ESG and Impact. She's an author of The Greenhouse Approach. She specializes in technology and communications, and she's got really quite a illustrious career, which I'm going to sort of detail a little bit later on. But she posted quite a very personal and impassioned post on LinkedIn about Roe v. Wade. So I wanted to connect up with her and ask her what this decision meant to her and why it impacted her so vehemently personally. Dr. Anand, welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you, Brian, so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
It's our pleasure. So tell me, your post was quite personal. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that, please.
Well, the ruling was quite personal, and I think, as a woman, particularly a woman who is a minority, a woman that's been in the corporate world, a woman that has had children, a woman that is a working mother. When you hear such a ruling, I couldn't help but feel that it transcended women in so many different ways. For me, this ruling is not just, it's a woman's right, it's a human rights issue, but it's also a health issue that impacts women. And I couldn't help but think, Brian, what this ruling means for women in the workplace and the correlations. As you know, I'm a researcher and I'm always looking at correlations, interdependencies, variables. And we're at such a unique time in this world where we're trying to make progress for women of color, trying to get women in CEO positions, getting women on boards, having equity in the workplace, having a voice for women. And this ruling, for me, set us back.
You also had a personal connection. Do you feel comfortable telling us about that?
Sure, go ahead, ask away.
I understand you had an abortion yourself.
I did. And the point of me actually highlighting that, Brian, was that, this impacts all women in various demographics, in various points of their life. And what I wanted to do, Brian, was normalize it. That having an abortion or terminating a pregnancy is a very, very personal decision. And it is one that impacts women in many different ways. And so it's a decision that's never taken lightly. However, it is a woman's decision because it transcends, it's her decision. Like I said in my post, it's her life. It's her body. And so for me, my hope there and my intent was to normalize the fact that, yes, these things happen. Yes, it impacts women at different levels, and women need to make their own decisions and need to feel empowered to do so. And in my case, it was the responsible decision to make at that moment in time in my life, and that we need to respect that. And if we want equity, true equity in this world as it relates to women, then we have to look at very fundamentals. And this ruling has sort of taken us backwards as a result.
I want to, if I could, just read your post for people, because I thought it was very impactful. And when I read it, I reached out to you right away because I really wanted to interview you about this.
Thank you.
This is Dr. Chitra Anand, Managing Director, ESG and Impact. And she says, I've been reflecting on the decisions of the Supreme Court over the past several days, what it means for women, the implications, and how it transcends into areas of equity that women have been striving for decades. In 2007, I had an abortion. I never shared this with anyone, my family, nor my husband. Yet here I am now sharing this with my professional community. Why? Because this ruling represents so much more for women. When I learned of my pregnancy at the time, I knew exactly what I had to do. It was a very definitive decision. Although I knew I wanted a family and I'm blessed to be a mother now, the circumstances at the time were completely wrong. I knew this for sure. For me, it was the responsible decision. I was so fortunate that I had a safe place to go to have this procedure done properly with proper care. For any woman making such a decision, it is very, very difficult, but it is her decision. It is her body. It is her mind. It is her life. I have many things that concern me from this ruling. Most importantly, the women who won't have access to safe places and what those outcomes will be. When safe and legal access to abortion is restricted, women are forced to resort to less safe methods, too often with damaging or disastrous results. I think back to a film about this very thing from the 1950s, Vera Drake, a woman in Ireland who performed illegal abortions because they had nowhere to go. Women died. It's not just about illegal abortions and safety, but the message that we are sending to women about being sexually active and the implications around this. Then I think about women in the workplace and the work that is being done on equity, women on boards, women in leadership roles, and the overall dynamics between men and women in the workplace. What are the correlations of the ruling on these issues? It means something bigger and deeper. How do we even begin to address the issues in the workplace when fundamental rulings are passed as it relates to a woman's own basic right? Control, power, defeat. It is overwhelming. We must continue to fight the good fight. It was a very impactful, well-written, obviously well thought out post that you put. Why did you decide to go to your professional community on LinkedIn and post such a post?
I thought about it quite a bit. That ruling came out on Friday, Brian, and then I took the weekend and reflected quite a bit, trying to understand. I did a lot of reading. I read through the news cycles, and we are in 2022, Brian, and that for me, I think that although we've made progress in our world around women and women's rights, this ruling has just sort of put this, stake in the ground where it's just, it made me feel and think about how much more work we have. And it's so difficult for women in the workplace. Like if you look at, and I've been in the corporate world for over 25 years, the number of women CEOs of Fortune 500 is still very, very low. If you look at women on corporate boards, the number is still very, very low. If you look at the gender pay gap, it still exists. If you look at, who was the most impacted by the pandemic, it was women. Women had to leave the workforce in order to care for their families. And, I have felt this and I feel this, and I look at my community and I look at the struggles that they have, in the workplace, and I still feel it. And then, it was a risk for me, Brian, to come and share that very personal story. And I thought long and hard about it. I wasn't going to write it, then I was going to write it, then I wasn't going to write it. But for me, Brian, I believe truly that women need to speak up, that in order for us to really drive change, and I've been a very strong advocate of this, is that we cannot be afraid to show our vulnerabilities. That if we want equity, if we want to drive change, if we want to look at some of the systemic issues that are plaguing us in the workplace and even at a societal level, we need to share our stories. We need to share our little personal vulnerabilities, because without that, we won't get a reaction and you won't drive change. And that was really, and I truly, I feel that in my soul. And I think that we need to do more of that so that we can start to redesign systems, really look at things from a grassroots perspective, to look at how do we drive more systemic change in how we build companies and how we have women in leadership positions. We just compromise basic human rights. And it just, it just made me think about, what does this actually mean from a bigger picture perspective? And I felt so connected to it that I had to write that post. Yeah.
We're chatting tonight with Dr. Chitra Anand, professor at Centennial College, about her own personal reaction to the Roe v. Wade decision by the Supreme Court in the United States just about 10 days ago. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Dr. Anand in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We've got a fairly controversial topic that we want to talk about today, and that is abortion, pro-life or pro-choice, and specifically the Roe v. Wade decision by the Supreme Court in the United States about 10 days ago that some people think set back. The New York Times, Sunday New York Times this past weekend says it set back the United States politically a generation, 50 years or so. So it's interesting, and lots of topics about the implications that I'm going to ask our guest tonight about other topics, other issues, both from a women's right as well as LGBT gay rights and other rights that people are worried this might mean the Supreme Court fines against. Our guest tonight is Dr. Chitra Anand. She is an award-winning communications and marketing executive. She's got over 20 years in the technology industry. She spent time as the head of communications for Microsoft Canada, director of marketing at TELUS Corporation, and director of operations at OpenText. Projects she guided at Microsoft and TELUS have been awarded the IABC Gold Quill Awards, the Canadian Public Relations Society Awards of Excellence, the Corporate IT Hero Award by the Information Technology Association of Canada, and the Business for the Arts Awards. Anand is at the forefront of an important new movement in the workplace, intrapreneurship. Entrepreneurs are the people within your organization who possess an entrepreneurial spirit, driving innovation, creative thinking, and new ideas. She is a doctoral researcher, innovation and cultural change keynote speaker, professor, and a writer. And tonight, we're talking about her personal reaction to the Roe v. Wade decision by the Supreme Court in the United States. Dr. Anand, just before the break, you were really referring to how you think this decision impacted more than just abortion, how it impacted a whole bunch of other things in regards to women's rights. Why do you see this as not just a statement by the Supreme Court on abortion, but really what I perceive saying is that you see it as a statement against lots of different rights that females have. You quoted, pay equity. You quoted women CEOs, women on boards. Why do you see this as impacting rights for women far greater than just the right to have an abortion?
Thanks for the question, Brian. When the ruling came out, I've been in the corporate world for such a long time, and I think the ethos of this this correlation is really looking at, if we can't achieve a basic human right, the question then becomes, although we've had progress in the workplace, what does this actually mean at a larger level for women as we're trying to achieve equity? I almost feel like, we're taking steps backwards. Everything that's been done is now undone. And how does that translate into getting women's on boards as CEOs? What does it actually mean? And so it's a bit of a contradiction. It's a bit of a hypocrisy, if I may say so. It's such a strong word. And for me, when I heard about the ruling, it just seems like the efforts that we're continuously trying to make in the workplace seem futile. The stats continue to be low while the efforts try to be high. However, the output stays the same or actually regresses. And I said just before the break, even as a result of the pandemic, the biggest population that was truly impacted by the pandemic were working mothers, having to leave the workplace in order to care for their children. So, there are correlations, and it would be, irresponsible for us to not really take a few steps back and to think about what those implications really are and how does that really translate into the workforce? Basic rights versus bigger rights as we're trying to move and to shift women's roles in the workplace.
Now, I'm far from a legal scholar, but my understanding is the way that the Supreme Court decided is it decided based on the rights that existed when the Constitution was drafted effectively back
Right.
200 and whatever, 50 years ago or something like that. And at the time, you know, ironically, maybe not ironically, but only white men that owned property actually had the vote. And so I really wonder about, you know, taking everything back to a time when the Constitution was written as the way that you interpret what the writers of the Constitution meant. But the ruling was that that you did not have that the national government did not have a right that was granted by way of the Constitution to rule on abortion, that it was something that either states had to rule on or that you had to have a federal law that would be passed, but it wasn't a God-given right by the Constitution that females would have the right to have an abortion. So it was a fairly legalistic determination that they made. And it was a legalistic determination based on the reading of the rights that the Constitution granted at the time, 1700 or something like that. Does that change the way you think about what you just described of this as being really an attack or an affront to lots of different rights that females have? Or is it the reverse, that it's actually worse, that, you know, women weren't given the right to vote until 1930 or something like that? Could the right to vote be taken away?
I mean, it's a very good point, Brian. I mean, I'm not a legal expert by any means, but I mean, if you apply first principles thinking to this, I mean, the fact of the matter is, you know, I study quite a bit of Darwinianism when I do my research in terms of, and I draw parallels and like around the theory of evolution. And, you know, in order for us to see progress, we need to challenge some of those systems. And you just said that these systems were developed by white men. I mean, if you look at systems in corporations and how they're governed, they were developed by white men. And so you have to go back and start to question how and why were systems developed the way that they were. And if we want society to evolve, we need to now revisit the systems and how they were written. We need a form of evolution. And, you know, you talk about women's rights and how they've changed over time. And, you know, if you want the world to evolve, then our systems need to be redesigned. And that's another area of that I'm studying is systems reengineering. You know, but we have to evolve as a society over time. I mean, if you look at some of the trends from a worldview perspective, like women are, you know, we have the percentage of working mothers, women in the workplace. You see trends on how companies are trying to adapt and support women in the workplace. You have high flex environments. You know, women are even having children later in life. You know, I didn't have my first baby until 39. I had my second one at 41, pushing 42. And so the risk as you get older is higher around birth defects. And so there are critical screenings that happen in the first trimester, in the second trimester. In the first trimester, there's fetal ultrasounds and maternal blood testing. And these screenings assess the risk level with birth defects. These are really important. So, you know, you're taking away a woman's right to make a critical decision, and it's her decision. You know, it's a very complex, and it's a very complicated and intertwined topic. It's quite, the questions then become around, you know, is it better to, you know, birth a child that's going to have, you know, a poor quality of life with a high degree of birth defects, you know, and, you know, with that, you know, you want to talk about physical and mental health of women, that, you know, if that child is birthed, what is the implications of mental health on women trying to raise a child that is unwell, and you know, it's about the responsible decision, and you know, but the point is the person that's impacted most is the woman, because that is the caregiver of the child. So, I mean, it's quite complicated, and there's lots of different things, but these markers are embedded for a certain reason, for them to be informed decisions around what it is that they need to do in the best interest of themselves and their families. So, the systems need to evolve.
Right. While the Supreme Court did not make the decision on religious grounds,
Yeah.
there were numerous different people that have been interviewed over the course of the last couple of weeks. So you've probably seen some of them as well, that fervently believe their position on the other side of things. And some of the females that I have seen interviewed are vehement in their belief that this is a human rights issue in regards to the rights of the unborn, and that another life exists. It exists at conception, and so therefore, the reason why this ruling they think is appropriate is because it's protecting the right of the unborn. How do you react to that?
Well, I guess when people feel a certain way around a topic, that's their construct, right? This is my construct. We can argue that it's a human rights issue from the other side, but my position on this, Brian, is that it's a human rights issue. It's a woman's issue. It's also a health issue, right? It's a health issue. And when we talk about women's health, that's a big topic, particularly around women's mental health. And no one really understands the implications of what that means for a woman until they actually live it. So it's also her lived experience. So, this is my perspective. I truly believe that it is a woman's right to decide what she chooses to do based on her circumstances. Circumstances are changing. And she wants to be in the best position possible to make an informed decision on what's best suited for how she could care for that, or whether or not she chooses to bring that child into the world, etc. But those are her circumstances, those are her decisions, those are her rights, and I stand strongly behind that.
And so people that say that there's another human that needs to be protected, you just disagree with.
I mean, I see their perspective. I'm always taking an empathetic approach to how I am presented with challenges. I see their perspective, Brian, but I don't necessarily agree with it based on the facts that I believe, and really on the outcomes. And it's really about having the right to make a decision.
There was a fascinating article again in the Sunday New York Times this past weekend about it's difficult for moderates to exist in today's world. And one of the examples that was provided, and I ended up in an interesting conversation with someone about this, is that a lot of people personally would feel very comfortable with your position during the first trimester, maybe the first and the second trimester, but might not feel comfortable with your position in the third trimester if they were making a personal decision. But the pro-life position is that it's got to be no abortions from conception on, and the pro-choice position's got to be that it's from the date of birth.
Time frame. Yeah.
And so while there's this gray period potentially for some people, some moderates, some people in the middle, during that 9-month period, it's like the two extremes can't actually consider that potentiality, because then people would say, well, it's the slippery slope. If you say, well, you can't abort during the first two semesters, then all it's going to end up being all or nothing. What do you think? Is there ever a chance to find a middle ground?
Look, it's never an easy decision. I will say that for sure as a woman. And, I think the longer you go into a pregnancy, the harder it becomes. I mean, obviously, the process, the duration, it becomes a much more complex, personal, type of situation. It's never easy. You know, but like I said, there's certain markers along the way that are indicators for the mother on sort of the severity and complexity of the situation. And I get it, and I understand what they're saying, but again, whosever decision it is to make those changes, it's really the woman's decision. Will there ever be a reconciliation? I mean, I don't know, but at the end of the day, it's like you're giving them the data to assess the risk, and then it's up to that person to take the data and to make the best informed decision, both for the unborn child and for themselves and the circumstances. And we hope that given the circumstances and given the data, that they make the best choices available. And it's really around the freedom of choice, the freedom of decision making, and making the best informed decisions.
We're chatting tonight with Dr. Chitra Anand. She is the Managing Director of ESG and Impact. She is the professor at Centennial College. We're going to take a break for some messages, and we're going to be back in 2 minutes with Dr. Anand again. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight about what a lot of people, as I said, might think a difficult topic, and that is abortion. A woman's right to choose versus pro-life positions, and specifically the Supreme Court in the United States decision on Roe v. Wade. And our guest is Dr. Chitra Anand, who a week ago posted quite an impactful personal story about her own decision to get an abortion, how it was the right decision for her at the time, and how she believes it is every female's right to make that decision. Dr. Anand, do you worry that this is going to impact Canada?
I mean, that's a great question, Brian. I worry that it's going to impact women in different ways. As I wrote in the post, is, I can't help but think about, how does it impact the dynamics in the workplace? How is it going to transcend or perhaps manifest in different ways as we relate to women trying to achieve different kinds of rights in the workplace that we've been striving for so long? And so, will there be some kind of unconscious biases, right? All of these things that we might not be able to recognize or see correlations with that might transcend. And I think that there will be. So, it's just a real, I wouldn't even say it's symbolism or a signal or representation of how this is going to, start to, impact all of the efforts that we've tried to make over the several decades. So I do think there's going to be impact as it relates to that. However, we also live in a, if you think about the actual ruling itself, we're fortunate to live in a country where we do support the rights of women as it relates to those decisions. And so I'm very grateful for that, obviously. And I've had many women that have been impacted by this as well. And we feel very fortunate to live in a country that do support the rights of women and the decisions that they need to make around abortions as such.
I found it interesting. I think that you were quoted, I'm not sure whether it was you or you were just commenting on it, but in the Globe and Mail about there is no better time to be a woman than right now.
That's an old article. What's the year on that? Do you know the year?
I don't see it.
Oh, you don't see it. Yeah, that was a few years ago. It's interesting. I did write that article several years ago. And something interesting has happened over the last couple of years. And I've said this to a few people. I feel like over the last 5 years, the fight to get women into leadership positions and on boards has become more difficult. And I'm not sure why, and I'm trying to get my head around it, but I've spoken to a lot of women, and the resistance seems to be higher now for some reason, and I don't know why. So we'll have to talk about that. I am working on a bit of a research project right now, but I would say over the last 5 years that women have become, and you're starting to see this, they're starting to leave the workforce because of the struggle of getting into these positions, whether it's the competition, whether it's the number of positions, but a lot of women have decided to leave the workforce. So we'll have to come back to that as I'm researching this very topic. And it's interesting that you brought that article up, because I felt very strongly about that at that particular time. But
you don't anymore.
No, I would say over the last 3 to 5 years, the challenges, whether or not it's because we as much as we've made progress, the challenges still exist. Like, it's 2022. Why do we still have a pay gap with women and men? It's 2022. Why are there only 13 women out of the however many Fortune 500 companies we have there as CEOs? Why are the numbers? And I think it's around progress. Like, I really believe that progress is the key to equity. But when the progress is slow, that's when you start to get disillusioned, when we don't see progress. So if you look at when I wrote that article today, and the progression is at a very slow pace. And here we are sitting at 2022, having the same conversations over and over and over again. So it's really around progress. So you'll have to come back to me on that one, as I'm trying to unpack that a little bit more.
It's interesting that you're commenting about this. When I take a look at your resume, you've done just about everything. Unbelievably impressive background. You're currently the advisor to the chief executive officer of an organization in New York called the Social Architects. You're on the advisory committee for the Forbes School of Business and Technology. You're on the advisory committee for the University of Ottawa Life Research Institute. You're a professor at Centennial College. You're a keynote speaker in innovation and cultural change. You're the managing director and partner of ESG and Impact Clarita Strategic Advisors. You're the advisor to the chief executive officer of Neurocen, and I could go on and on and on. You've got an equally illustrious educational background with an MBA from, is it the Kellogg School?
Yes.
And an associate's degree in organizational leadership from Harvard University, a BCom from Wilfrid Laurier University, and a PhD from the University of Bradford.
Yes.
So you've done pretty good.
Thank you. It's been a lot of work. But, so are you trying to make a point? So your point is, and I have a comment on it. So go ahead.
You're commenting about how it's challenging for females today. You've done extremely well. Are you unique and not a normal example, or are more females achieving the things similar to what you're achieving?
Well, I would say, it's been a lot of work. I am lucky to have a very supportive partner, one that has switched roles with me, where he's been the caregiver for our children, and I've been the one pursuing all of the work. So, and I think that's uncommon. So, we have to take into consideration how women are working. And, even when I was at Microsoft, for example, I was hired when I was 8.5 months pregnant, and I didn't take a mat leave. My husband stayed home, took care of the baby, but, would shuffle the baby to work so I could nurse. It was, but what we had to do, Brian, and what I think I did, is I challenged the norms. I challenged how women worked, and I didn't take no for an answer. So if you would like me to do this role, I'll do it, but my baby needs to come with me in the boardroom. If you want me to take this role, I'll do it, but my family has to travel with me because I'm nursing. So what I did is I challenged the way workplaces supported women at the time and just kind of did what I needed to do to achieve what it is I needed to do. So am I an anomaly? I mean, I don't know. I just knew I'm deeply passionate about my work. I'm a person and a woman that is equally passionate about being a mother, but I need my work in order to make me whole. I'm extremely multidimensional, and I know that about myself. And so, in order to do that, you have to challenge the systems. Like earlier, I talked about the systems. The systems are flawed in terms of how we support women in the workplace. I took advantage of the technology and worked in different kinds of ways in order for me to achieve what it is that I needed to do. So, I didn't need to be in the office all the time. I'd go in for in-person meetings, but then had to leave because I had a baby at home. I had to pick up another child. I had to make dinner, and you have all these other responsibilities in life that are quite diverse. So it's really about challenging the systems, and that's what I did. And I've always done that. And I think that for women, maybe some of them are afraid to challenge the system, or don't feel empowered to challenge the system, or don't know how to create an environment that's conducive to them having a family and also working. So perhaps it's a combination of all of the above.
So it sounds like you really think that this is, you haven't said this, but patriarchy or something like this that has made this decision, or it's impacted this decision. The system has made this decision in the United States. So if you were advising some pro-choice organizations in the United States today, if you were advising some females in the United States today that had to challenge the system, the patriarchy that had ruled against them, and that it had ruled against them on abortion, and you have said you're worried that it's going to influence other rights they have, what would you ask them to do? What would you be advising them to do? How can you challenge the system?
Well, I think that systems need to evolve. I mean, I think that systems need to be redesigned. I think that systems need to be human-centric. I think that, that in order to evolve as a society and in order to evolve the workplace, in order to understand how the pandemic has impacted people and organizations, and we talk about the new world of work, and we talk about hybrid, and we talk about the evolution of companies, that we need to, as very intelligent people, come to the table and say, if this is how the world is evolving, how do we now together redesign systems in order to accommodate these changes? You can't have old systems that support a new world. It's going to break. So you have to go back and redesign them in a way that's going to thrive, that's going to be sustainable. If you want innovation in your organizations, if you want equal rights for women, you need to redesign systems, and you need to include people of different diverse backgrounds. Why? Because we all have different ways of thinking. We've had different experiences. We have different constructs. In order for us to truly be, extract the best of the best in terms of thinking, we need to bring everybody together in order to redesign, in order to really look at what we want to achieve as organizations and as a society.
So neither in the United States or Canada is there a constitutional right to abortion. Neither the U.S. Congress nor the Canadian Parliament have actually passed laws that would grant the right for a woman to choose to have an abortion. And we've both in the United States and Canada sort of have received these rights via Supreme Court decisions that have effectively granted in the United States that right for the past 50 years, taken away 10 days ago, and similarly granted that right in Canada. But parliaments and Congress have not had the wherewithal, some would say guts, to actually pass laws that would grant that right. And for sure, there's never been a suggestion of a constitutional amendment Would you recommend the attempts at any of those to fight the system, to beat the system, to change the system?
I think systems need to be fought, Brian. I think systems need to be challenged. I think that that is the power of change. Anything good in our world, in society, has been a result of fighting the system. I mean, that's why I ended my post with, you fight the good fight. I mean, part of what I think, you said to me, you're fairly successful, but there's still this problem. I think that women are tired. I don't think that people leave because of the work. People leave because of the fight. It is exhausting. It is exhaustion. Why do you think there's been a massive exodus from the workforce? People are tired. And it is the two most valuable commodities that we have, Brian, are time and energy. Those are the two most valuable commodities that we have. And I think there's a huge realization around that. So if your energy is being used to fight, it's exhausting. We want to produce, we want to progress, we want to evolve, we want to become more intelligent, we want to be informed, we want more knowledge. And in order to do that, you need time and energy. But this fight is what is very tiring. But in order to drive change, like I said, we need to continue to strive for that. And these rulings, these decisions, and the rippling effect that it could have is one that's concerning. Therefore, I encourage people to share stories, to share thoughts, because if you don't, then we risk this stagnation and this lack of progress.
We're chatting tonight with Dr. Chitra Anand. She's a professor at Centennial College. She's got an unbelievably illustrious educational background and resume, but we're talking really about her own personal point of view right now on the Supreme Court decision on Roe v. Wade. We're going to take a final break for some final messages and be back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Dr. Chitra Anand. She is the Managing Director of ESG and Impact. She's a professor at Centennial College, and she's an author of a book called The Greenhouse Approach. She's an expert on entrepreneurship. I'd love to have her back and talk about some of these other topics at some point in time. But the reason why I wanted to have her on today is because she wrote a very personal and impactful post last week that I really wanted to reach out to her and ask her about in regards to the Roe v. Wade decision. I want to read a little bit of it just for you for a second here. This is what Dr. Chitra Anand has said. I've been reflecting on the decisions of the Supreme Court over the past several days, what it means for women, the implications, and how it transcends into areas of equity that women have been striving for decades. In 2007, I had an abortion. I never shared this with anyone, my family nor my husband. Yet here I am now sharing this with my professional community. Why? Because this ruling represents so much more for women. When I learned of my pregnancy at the time, I knew exactly what I had to do. It was a very definitive decision. Although I knew I wanted a family and I'm blessed to be a mother now, the circumstances at that time were completely wrong. I knew this for sure. For me, it was the responsible decision. I was so fortunate that I had a safe place to go to have this procedure done properly with proper care. For any woman making such a decision, it is very, very difficult, but it is her decision. It is her body. It is her mind. It is her life. Dr. Nand, I was really quite impacted by your post. I heard on the news last week that there were 970,000 abortions in the United States last year. Is that a surprisingly large number or a small number to you? What do you think about that number?
I mean, obviously, when you say the number, it seems high. But we also need to think about circumstances, right? I'm all about circumstances. What were the conditions? Were they high risks? Were women raped? There's all sorts of variables, Brian, right? So when you actually start to dissect it, then you start to understand situations and the circumstances. So while it seems like it's high, you need to start asking more questions in order to reveal fundamental truths behind those numbers. And that's what I would find more interesting in terms of what those circumstances to better try and understand the situation.
There was a report on the weekend that requests for vasectomies had skyrocketed, which almost suggests that people were using abortion as really birth control, rather than something more profound than birth control, and that once abortion had been ruled not constitutional right by the Supreme Court and potentially ruled illegal in numerous different states, a whole bunch of men decided to take it upon themselves to do something about it. If you were speaking to a young female that found out she was pregnant in a state that no longer had the right for an abortion, what would you tell her to do?
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, that's a very personal question. I mean, I wouldn't, I would say this. I mean, obviously, it's a very, very personal decision. It is a big decision that one should not take lightly, and nobody ever does. I would certainly ask her to think through the scenarios, play it forward, understand her circumstances, and to make the most responsible decision. And if it's illegal in that state, then to seek guidance and support from somewhere where it's not, inform herself, educate herself, understand the implications of her decisions, but know that she's empowered and that she has a responsible decision to make. That's, that's that on how it impacts herself and her life is what I would say.
If you were speaking to a Democratic Party convention or to a women's organization conference, and you were chatting about systems and challenging systems, what would you say?
Well, I mean, for me, it's a very simple answer, Brian, is that if we want progress means evolving our system. It's like anything. It's, how do we evolve? Look at our world. I mean, we've been completely disrupted by technology, the way we eat, the way we sleep, the way we travel, the way we, everything. The system has been disrupted. And that to me is progression. It's how we move forward. It's human progression. If you look at the theory of evolution, it's all progress. It's evolution. It's a theory of evolution. And, but in order for society to evolve and for workplaces to evolve and looking at laws and certain laws on how we govern ourselves, systems have to be questioned. They have to be questioned from a design perspective and how they need to be reconfigured, reassessed, redefined, reconstructed, understanding what our outcomes are. We will stand still as a society if our systems remain stagnant. And that's a fundamental truth. We need to redesign, refocus, iterate, evolve in order for us to move forward as a society, as human beings, quite frankly.
We've been chatting tonight with Dr. Chitra Anand. She's a professor at Centennial College, obviously a very learned and passionate speaker, someone that I really would like to have back on several other topics. But tonight's topic was about the Roe v. Wade decision by the Supreme Court in the United States about 10 days ago that made it no longer a constitutional right in the United States for females to choose to have an abortion. Let me end, if I could, with my own 2 cents on this topic. I think that there's just no question, obviously, that before conception, life does not exist. And I also think that after birth, life exists. But during those 9 months in between, it's not a for sure thing. And it is a little bit gray. And, I think from my own personal standpoint, I'm not a female, but if I was a female or if I was involved in an unwanted pregnancy, I don't think I'd have difficulty early in that pregnancy in choosing to have an abortion, but I might have difficulty choosing to have an abortion later on in that pregnancy. And so I really wonder if it is a gray area that you just don't know whether that fetus is viable on its own, and whether it truly is a separate life. then I think it really is a woman's right to choose, and hopefully in consultation with her healthcare practitioner and potentially her partner if the partner is someone in her life. But it should be the woman's right to choose, and I don't think that the Constitution, the laws, the land, the justice system should have some sort of say on that. I also think that this idea that the Constitution, either in the United States or Canada, is something that existed at the time of being written and should not change over time, I think is wrong. And I think that, as Dr. Anand has talked about, systems have to be confronted and changed and evolve over time. I sort of said tongue in cheek that at the time of the Constitution, the only people that could vote were white men that owned property, and clearly our definition of democracy and one person, one vote has evolved dramatically since then. And so to live in a world of 1786 or of 1867 is completely wrong. We have to think about how rights have evolved, because rights have clearly evolved. People that rent now have a right to vote. People that are not white have a right to vote. People that are female have a right to vote. And probably, frankly, always should have had that right, but we've evolved the system. And so to say that we can't evolve a system associated with rights for abortion, frankly, rights to bear arms, other issues that we've confronted in our society. And one of the topics that came up in the last 10 days is this the first shoe to fall, and is gay marriage one of the next issues that the Supreme Court may rule on. So I think that number one, it should be a women's right to choose. And number two, I think that constitutions, whether they be in Canada or the United States, are living documents that have to evolve over time. Anyway, Dr. Chitra Anand, thank you so much for joining us. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Crombie on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.